What should be our response to climate change? I'm Daniel R. Jennings, and today we're going to answer that question. It's hard to live in the United States without, on a daily basis, hearing about climate change. Climate change is the belief that the climate of the earth is changing in such a way that is actually causing an increase in the intensity or number of hurricanes, earthquakes, diseases, famines, and wars. Here's an article entitled, "Study Finds That Climate Change Causes Wars." Here's another article entitled, "Famine is on the Rise Around the World and Climate Change is to Blame." Here's yet another article that states how climate change is exacerbating the spread of disease. And here's an article that shows how that climate change triggers earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanoes. Here's yet another article that states climate change is making storms like Hurricane Florence worse. And there's a great disagreement going on between how to view these changes. I think most people agree that these changes are happening, that these things seem to be increasing and intensifying. But the question is, how should we respond to it? And actually, two different groups have come at heads and at odds with each other. There are those who look at it totally in a materialistic way, and they have come to the conclusion that the burning of fossil fuels has largely contributed to this change in the climate, which has caused all these other things to happen. Then there are others who feel that the burning of fossil fuels has little to no impact on it, and they see it as something that has been caused by God for a specific plan and a specific purpose. And so what this shows us is that there's really two different ways of looking at climate change. There's the materialistic way or method in which, purely from a scientific standpoint of only what can be seen is investigated, and that is solely used to try and determine what is going on. Then on the other hand, you have those who come at it from a spiritual perspective, and they look in the Bible, trying to discern exactly why all these things are increasing. When we look at it from a spiritual perspective, one thing that is often brought up is that 2,000 years ago, when Jesus' disciples came to him and asked him, what would the world be like before he returned? He described a world that would be experiencing all of the things that climate change scientists say are occurring today because of the burning of fossil fuels. In the Bible we read that, "Now as Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?' And Jesus answered and said to them, 'You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. All these are the beginning of sorrows.'" So we see there are two different ways of looking at it. Some people are looking at it from a spiritual perspective. Some people are looking at it from a totally materialistic perspective and kind of only what they can see. Other people look at it from a faith perspective with what they cannot see. And that's where the tension is coming from. So we kind of have to ask ourselves some questions. And I'm kind of in an interesting position because when I first went to college, I studied religion and earned some degrees in religion. After that, I went back to school and got a Master of Science in Information Technology, and I'm currently working on a PhD in Information Systems. So I kind of have a background of both, faith and science. And so sometimes I think that can help people to see things a little differently than just how people may in one category or with only one background. But I think really we have to look at it. We can't look at it just from a materialistic perspective. It's not bad to look at it from a materialistic perspective. We have been entrusted with being the stewards of the earth, and so we have a responsibility for, if we're doing something that's causing all these things to increase, such as if it is coming solely from the burning of fossil fuels, well, there's nothing wrong with looking into that and making changes as may be necessary. But if we're only going to look at it from a materialistic perspective, I'm afraid we're going to miss out on something. Because when we look at it from a spiritual perspective, a couple of things stand out. And that is, one, Jesus said that the world would be experiencing all of these things before he came back. And he said that 2,000 years ago. Now, all scholars of any credibility acknowledge that Jesus was a real, living human being who lived in Palestine 2,000 years ago. That's really not even debatable. Anybody that raises the argument that Jesus never existed is kind of just, shown the door. They're not taken seriously, because everybody who is, respectable as far as looking into the historicity of Jesus acknowledges that he was a real person. We know that he claimed to speak for God. He said that he had been sent by God on behalf of God to warn the world that God was going to judge all of us for the good and the bad things that we had done, that there was going to be a judgment day in which all of us would be held responsible. And finally, Jesus said that the time in which that, as we got closer and as leading up to that time of judgment, that it was going to be marked by all of the things that climate change scientists acknowledge are happening in our day and time. So really, it's fine to look at it from a materialistic perspective and say, from a scientist, I just want to know how this is possibly operating. Is it the burning of fossil fuels that is causing this? Is it some other phenomena? There's nothing wrong with that. That's one of the ways that God has gifted us to understand the world that he created, is that we can look at it on a material level and try and figure out what's going on. But at the same time, we also have to look at this from a spiritual perspective. And we have to say, okay, it's pretty unlikely that a man who was not really an educated person, he came from the lower class of society, not a scholar, he's just a common, everyday, average, ordinary man. He rises up on the scene. He teaches people things that they take and teach others, and it just keeps expanding, and to the point that he changed human history in a way greater than any other human who has ever lived. And that having done all this, he also said that one day he would come back to judge the world, and that the world would look the way that it looks today and is being blamed on climate change. How did someone in those circumstances, how did he know that? How could he seemingly predict that? As I said, it's fine to take climate change into consideration from a materialistic perspective, but don't discount the teachings of the man who was the most influential man in history and who changed the total course of history in a way greater than anyone else ever did. Don't discount what he said about what we seem to be seeing today, because if he was able to change the world history in a way that no one else was able to, maybe he knows something about this climate change that other people are not realizing, because they're only looking at it from a materialistic perspective. So keep an open mind and keep studying about climate change and other things. I'm Daniel R. Jennings, and this is another Life Lesson.